Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima. It's been 10 years, hasn't it? It's just genuinely been 10 years since the Vita came out. Well, technically it's been a little bit more than that, of course, if you're going by the Japanese release date time, or if you're going by the first editions that some Americans got like a week early that came with the game and Little Deviants, which was like one of the worst games of the launch lineup, because the launch lineup of the Vita was actually kind of impressive for its day. And yet somehow people were like, oh, there's no games on the Vita. And of course, we're going to be talking about that at some point throughout this absolute garbage video that I've got going on here. But with that said, I'm going to put some music on in the background. I haven't played TXK in a long time, and this seemed like a perfectly good excuse. So, why the hell not, right? So, the problem is, what do you say about the Vita that hasn't already been said? That's just kind of the question that I've got going on right now, because everything's already been said over and over again by every journalist who's finally gotten their head out of their ass and seen, oh hey, the Vita actually has some good games that we should be talking about, and we might actually be the problem. We might be the reason why the Vita was never as popular as it should have been, instead of just slagging it off for having no games, despite the fact we clearly never actually played any of the games on the fucking thing. But yeah, everybody's kind of come to the conclusion that the Vita was a portable Dreamcast, when everybody came to that conclusion years ago, or at least the people who actually owned and played Vitas realistically. And of course, there were many things, many things that were wrong with the Vita's existence, but I don't feel the need to go over the obvious ones, like the whole no games thing that idiots would just spout around and just never actually try the games that were on Vita in the first place, because then what do you think no games means, retard? Then of course there was also the memory cards, which again we don't need to go over that. It's obvious how bad that was. The proprietary charging port, we don't need to go over that because of how obvious that was. But there are so many mistakes that they've made, like, in the background of the Vita. And I know that this is mainly going to be an old man yells at cloud ranting video, because, well, that's just kind of how I do things nowadays. 10 years on the Vita and I've been incredibly bitter. I don't know if that's the Vita or if that's just me, but it just makes it all just so depressing, because there are so many opportunities that were missed out on. So many things that Sony could have done, just even with a little bit of money in its back pocket, to make the Vita work, and they just chose not to. They chose not to compete. They chose to make it just a weird little device for watching videos and remote playing a PlayStation 4 on, while simultaneously never giving you the ability to customize the controls of the remote play app. What the hell were they thinking anyway? So, other things about the Vita that just kind of threw it down a hole that it never crawled back out of. Advertising. I live in Australia, and we never got Vita advertising except for one very specific period. And it could not have been the worst advertising. No, let me try that again. It couldn't have been worse advertising if you tried. So, there were these 30-second ads that played on TV, and they were playing all the fucking time, right? Like, every time an ad break had come on through the middle of the day or something like that, you'd get at least one of the 3 ads as part of this ad campaign. The ad campaign was for Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, so that's already a black mark against it, right? But they also tried to make it look like it was a motion-controlled Call of Duty game. You'd be holding your Vita, and by you, I mean the guy like in the ad sitting on a lounge holding the Vita in front of him, apparently playing Black Ops Declassified. He'd be holding the Vita and jerking it back like he was firing a gun. I don't know what the hell they were going for with that advertising, but it's a Call of Duty game. So, you know, they didn't actually show that much of the Call of Duty, for obvious reasons, because that game really was Call of Duty. But the fact that they were trying to advertise motion controls. In 2013, or at least that might have been the year Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, the year it came out, like when it was within a week of coming out, these ads started up and they stopped pretty quickly after that. Then it was like, yeah, so motion controls. In 2012 to 2013, when the Wii had already been out for 6 years and kind of proved that it was a bad idea. I mean, it's not a bad idea in and of itself, but the gaming community clearly didn't like motion controls in its hardcore aimed audience when it came to something like Call of Duty, right? So advertising a Call of Duty game with motion controls just seemed like the stupidest thing you could have possibly done. The Vita itself never got any advertising other than that. No other Vita games got any advertising on Australian TV. It was genuinely just nothing but Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified for weeks. Talk about putting all your eggs in the wrong basket, eh? And then, of course, there was like the E3 2014 where they started out by saying PlayStation Now is apparently going to be a Vita thing. That never turned out the way they expected, did it? They, of course, just refused to make any major retail games after a certain period, to the point where they had an infamous demo. Sony Bend had an infamous demo. It was apparently quite good and ready to go, at least according to Sony Bend themselves. And yet, Sony was just like, nah, you're not going to be shipping this. Work on something else. And that ended up becoming Days Gone. And Days Gone ended up being... well, it wasn't shit, but it felt like such an amalgamation of every other game ever. Despite the fact that it was in the works for, like, years. So, yeah, that didn't turn out great, did it? I'm not even sure what the... I'm not even sure what they're working on now. It's not Siphon Filter. I think it's a new IP. I think that's what they said it was going to be, but considering that the guy who was majorly responsible for Siphon Filter has, like, up and left the company. He up and left before Days Gone was finished, so chances are that's never going to happen, which is a shame. Goddamn cliffhangers. But there are so many others that I can think of as well. Like, they had Metal Gear Solid 4 running on, like, Vita tech that they never did anything with. Obviously, it wasn't going to be Metal Gear Solid 4, but they could have done a Metal Gear Solid that would have been kind of amazing. It would have just been a better version of Peace Walker, and it would have been one of the best games of all time. They had a Yakuza demo running on the Vita, and it was like Akiyama talking to someone, and this is one of the tech demos that were showing off back before the Vita came out. But they never did anything with that except do a couple of companion apps, which is a shame because, man, when Yakuza got big in the West, imagine having a Vita game ready to go. Imagine being able to say, hey, we've got this, and just push out an advertising push for that. Hell, even having the Yakuza 0 companion app would have been great, but no. Sony couldn't even get them to localize that. God, what? Just makes you wonder what the hell Sony were thinking. Genuinely feels like they had no hands on deck after, like, the first year. And then, the one that disappoints me the most, and I just... the Vita almost had Titanfall. There's a Eurogamer article you can look up on this where, Respawn, aka the people who were responsible for making Call of Duty Modern Warfare, right? Like, one of the biggest FPS trilogies ever made, one of the biggest trilogies ever made, period, comes to a meeting with you, Sony Computer Entertainment, and says, we want to see what you've got coming for next gen. And instead of showing them what you have coming for next gen, you say, here's the PlayStation Vita, we're not showing you the PlayStation 4. And Respawn just gets up and walks away. Just, I don't understand it. I genuinely don't get how brain dead you would have to be. It feels like everyone who was in charge of the Vita was like, just puffing lead? Doing something? I don't know. I don't know. There's also, like, let me tell you how I would have handled the Titanfall situation. Here's the PlayStation 4 that we've got available right now. You have to remember that you're talking to the guys who made Call of fucking Duty for Modern fucking Warfare, fucking. So, You have to, like, you basically want to kowtow to them. I would have said, this is what we got so far. We're also willing to pay you to put something on the PlayStation Vita. A spin-off game, like a small single-player campaign or something like that, you know? If you give us Titanfall, we'll give you all of these resources, but you have to spend at least some of them making a spin-off for Vita or something like that. That would have been what I would have done. Sure, like, Titanfall ended up being my favorite FPS of the generation, which is why Titanfall 2 was such a stinking piece of shit. Because when I like something, it will eventually go to shit, won't it? But yeah, there are way more stories along these lines, right? There are way more stories of, like, games they passed up because they were just idiots, or things that they could have just given a little bit more assistance to that would have helped, like the ports of the PS2 trilogies. If they had been even slightly better, they would have been great, but no. The only one of those that came out that was actually good was, weirdly enough, the Sly Collection. I don't know why the Sly Collection came out so well. All the rest had some technical problems that made them hard to recommend. But honestly, there is a reason for that. Now, the Vita was perfectly powerful hardware at the time, but it was also weirdly underpowered for all the weirdest of reasons. And pretty much every component of the Vita you could think of had some kind of problem that made the Vita actually hard to develop for. Of course, there were developers and stuff that were able to get around it and whatnot, but a lot of games that the Vita otherwise could have had would have didn't actually happen because of one or two really strange problems. Like, for example, apparently the CPU wasn't particularly great. The developer of Little Big Planet's Vita specifically said something along the lines of, I had some absolutely massive trouble working with the Vita's CPU, the way that it handled its individual cores and multi-threading. I never got any really in-depth details about that, but it shows there was a problem there. A couple of developers that the names I can't remember of right now, I apologize for this, said that the GPU was also quite underpowered in comparison to the CPU, so they kind of had to, like, share the load one way, and it kind of made things hard to develop for. And then, on top of that, the Vita had very little RAM, and the dev kit did not help, because Vita retail units have 256 megabytes of RAM, which, to be fair, back in those times wasn't even that much, but it was enough to make a lot of stuff work. However, the development kits had 512 megabytes of RAM, and for whatever reason, instead of, like, separating these RAM blocks so that you could only use, like, the dev kit RAM for dev kit related stuff, and then have the 256 megs of RAM for the Vita itself just be for the Vita, they popped it all into one contiguous pool. And so as a result, this ended up being a massive problem for a lot of games, because people would get, like, these dev kits with 512 megs of RAM, find out halfway through development that the Vita itself only had 256 megabytes of RAM in the retail versions, and games would just never get done because there wasn't enough RAM to do it. There were several developers who came out and said, the Vita just doesn't have enough RAM to work with, including one very publicly on a Steam developer forum saying, I tried to port this to Vita. I took every step in saving memory that I could, and I just couldn't get it to work. And it was also the problem of a bunch of games that came out unstable. Like, Pox Snorer was infamous for crashing when it ran out of RAM because you could never get through an actual match without running out of RAM. Talisman apparently suffered from this problem as well. And the biggest one would be Silent Sanctuary. Because whenever you would, like, go from one area to another too quickly, or you used the debug menu to jump straight to, like, the game's ending, it didn't have enough RAM to keep up and it would crash. And there were also some bad crashing problems over the first couple of patches that they had to sort out. And I am willing to bet dollars to donuts, based on that debug crash, that it was a RAM problem. That they were working with more RAM than they realized that they had, and they had to cut it down. I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts on that one. So, all of the Vita's components were just kind of hard to develop for. And if the Vita spent like maybe 6 months more in development, or if they were willing to charge a little bit more and add a little bit more, although admittedly that would be getting into the absolutely ridiculous price range, there might have been more people willing to develop for the Vita. Even just doubling the available RAM on the retail units probably would have done so much for the platform, but it just never happened. And yeah, kinda sucks. At the very least, we weren't getting a ton of games that were cloud-powered towards the end, a la the Switch. Getting cloud versions of games that came out on the PlayStation fucking 2. Looking at you, Kingdom Hearts. Games that should have been a really easy port, that they were just like, nah, let's just dedicate a bunch of streaming hardware to this instead. That we have to spend on every single month. It's so weird, man. Like, why would you even bother? What else is there to talk about? Oh yeah! User error! User stupidity! Because, holy shit, some Nintendos are absolutely retarded. Now, I'm not saying this because I hate all Nintendos, or because I don't like the 3DS and I don't like the Switch. I don't like the 3DS and I don't like the Switch, but this isn't the reason why I'm saying this. And I don't like the Switch. People want me to make Switch videos, and honestly, I'm not going to pay more money for worse performing versions of games that I can play on my PC and have them be at much better experiences. Or my PlayStation 5 for that matter. Just because there will be better games there, just because they do perform better. Or any other, like, combination of the above factors. Not to mention that my Switch has been broken since almost the beginning. The slot on the side that holds the right Joy-Con just stopped working after a while, and then it came back, but if I try and hold my Switch for more than 2 minutes, the right Joy-Con will pop out, and I'll have to reslot it, so I can't play the damn thing, like, portably without taking it somewhere, putting it on the flimsy kickstand and playing it that way, and even then, 2.5 hours of gameplay, ugh. The Vita did better than that, but God, for some reason people are more than willing to pay for 2 hours of battery life, but not for 4 hours, which was what the Vita would get you. Yep, I don't know on that one either. But anyway, back to what I was actually saying. Nintendos are retarded. Why? Because I was a mod on r/Vita for the longest time, right? And there were people that were incredibly stupid. To the point where they would think, unironically, that because Nintendo was doing something, Sony was clearly doing it as well. Whether it be, is the Vita region locked? And they think that the Vita is region locked by default because Nintendo did it with the 3DS. Or they think, oh, when I buy digital games, am I not going to be able to get them back because that's what Nintendo does? And I'm convinced that those sorts of idiots did more damage to the Vita than having, like, proprietary memory cards did. Because, good lord, I don't even know how you come to that conclusion. And there's clearly a fair amount of people out there who thought that, and probably spread that around in their own way. And so as a result, they probably made the Vita look a lot worse than it already was. And I don't understand how it happened, but it happened. And I'm pretty sure it was one of the reasons why the Vita died. Nintendo were doing so stupid shit that it was spreading over into the other portables. And as a result, yeah, a lot of people who otherwise might have owned a Vita probably didn't own one because someone came along and said, oh, it's probably region locked. Can you tell that I'm bitter? Because I really did love the Vita. I really did. But it's been 10 years, and here's the thing about the Vita. Unlike a lot of other sort of niche consoles that still have their own, like, that still have their own fandoms and whatnot, a lot of the games that came out on the Vita were either already on another platform, whether it be like the PlayStation 4 or what have you. And then, On top of that, ones that didn't come out on like other platforms eventually got ported to other platforms. And I actually went and looked through my top 100 Vita games list, and there wasn't even like 10 that are still on the Vita exclusively. You can still get them on PS4, and because the PS5 is still around, backwards compatibility is going to be a thing for a while. There's only like, what, 12 games that don't work on PlayStation 5, and none of them are the ones that came out on Vita. So you can play them there if you absolutely have to. And games like Shiren 5, or just Shiren the Wanderer, the Tower of Fortune and the Dice of Fate, have come out on other platforms and are arguably better experiences now as a result, mainly the PC version of that game in particular. There are only a few games left that haven't come out on the Vita itself, and so they haven't come off of the Vita itself onto another platform, and so as a result, it's just, you know, when you've got the choice of playing the best version of a game or a neat version of a game on a portable system, considering that I barely go out anymore, I'm probably going to pick the PC version. And considering what's going to happen in the next 10 days, I get the feeling this is going to change for a lot of people. Especially the sort of people who bought the Vita as like a Persona 4 Golden machine, who'll be able to get their hands on a Steam Deck eventually. They'll be able to play through pretty much all the games that made the Vita special, but on a portable PC with way more games. And so, yeah, it was just... You knew it was the end when Persona 4 Golden found its way off the Vita and onto the PC. So, I don't mean to say that these games aren't worth playing on Vita anymore at all. It's just that I don't see the reason to play certain games on Vita anymore because I can play them on a platform that'll play the games better. Higher frame rates, higher resolutions, and potentially being a lot more comfortable than the Vita versions ever were. And it's a shame because the Vita is good hardware, it's just some of these games I couldn't keep up on. Like, I'd love to get my hands on a PC version of Gundam Breaker, and not new Gundam Breaker, but Gundam Breaker. But, like, visual novels are just better on PCs in general, just because of higher resolution, better quality speakers and what have you. There's a bunch of other games that I'm not going to bother to go over because you can make the obvious comparisons yourselves, but at least I can say that the thing that made the Vita good was the games. It wasn't the hardware, although the hardware was good, comfortable, and fun to play on. It wasn't the ancillary features, like being able to play music in the background, or take screenshots, or buy games digitally, or what have you. It was the games. And the absolute majority of games that made the Vita good have made their way onto PC, and when a Vita emulator eventually makes its way to being able to render 3D stuff, the rest will eventually follow. And this is okay. This is perfectly okay. It is the fate of most consoles, but what made the Vita special was the games and the experiences they gave you. And thanks to the Vita, I was able to have those special experiences. And thanks to the Vita, it actually completely changed my taste in games. Well, not so much completely. I still like first-person shooters. I still like really fast arcadey racing games. But it introduced me to a lot of things I otherwise might not have seen. And now that all those games are out on better platforms, the Vita has done its job. And I'm perfectly happy to say that it was well worth it. Just that I'm not going to be carrying a torch for the Vita for 10 more years unless someone very specifically comes up to me and says, "What makes the Vita special to you?" And I'll be able to answer them honestly. It was because it changed the way I looked at games forever. And so that's what the Vita was. That's what the Vita was good at. It was good at making you look at games you had never even considered and find something that you never thought you were going to appreciate as much as you possibly could have. I never would have played Muv-Luv if I hadn't spent several years working on a PlayStation Vita YouTube channel and just being sent review code for the Vita version out of nowhere by PQ. And that's probably my favorite game of all time now. And I can say that for a couple of other games that were showing up on the Vita as well. Like, you're looking at TXK in the background. which is another one of my favorite games. And hell, it's actually still better on the Vita than it is on the PC, because there is a port of TXK to the PC called Tempest 3000, but it has a lot of problems for some reason. Jeff Minter is usually really good at coding games, but apparently Tempest 3000 just came out really badly, and he wasn't able to patch it up because Atari were being dicks about it. So this is still the best version of TXK, which is incredibly strange to say, but there you go. So yeah, you knew this was going to be old man yells at cloud levels of ranting, right? But that's what I got to say. Sony made way too many mistakes, and it's obvious why the Vita failed as a result of it. But it still had an absolute ton of great games on them, on the Vita. And, well, frankly, it's good that you can play most of them on other platforms now. And I'm looking forward to when those Vita emulators get completed and I can play another game, Soul Sacrifice Delta, or Shinobito, or even Gundam Breaker 3, because I'd love to be able to play Gundam Breaker 3 on PC, even if it's through like a mangled Vita emulation version. With that said, I did put up on the community posts an ask for questions to put on a video like this, and I might as well go through them now because I don't really have that much else to say. So, you've been there from the beginning. What was the road like leading to today, and how do you see the situation? Well, I just said. The Vita had a lot of good games. Most of them are available on other platforms now, even ones that were exclusively on Vita. It is relatively time to let it go. You don't have to be Sims for the Vita anymore. Just recommend it to people if they ask. But just, you know, let it rest. It's fine. It's okay. You don't have to sim for it for the next 10 years. There's like 4 questions in this one post. What is your stance on preservation having lost online features? 2 different questions there, really, but the only reason we can play as many games as we can now is because of pirates. You can't legally play 90% of the NES library, or the SNES library, or the PlayStation 1 library, or the PlayStation 2 library, etc., etc. And if it wasn't for pirates, and following on from pirates emulation, that would be the case. You'd only be able to play like the 30 games Nintendo put out on the NES Classic, and that would be it. And that would be fucking awful. But thanks to the pirates, having figured this out from day one, or at least making attempts to figure this out on day one, for every console ever put out there, is the only reason why we're able to play as many games as we can. And with every new console upping in complexity and hardware restrictions in order to stop piracy and what have you, and of course emulation being an absolute pain in the neck to actually pull off, it's just going to get harder and harder for consoles as we go on. And of course, when you've got missing online features, that means that games are just going to be different than they originally were, and it's just kind of going to suck for those games because you're just never going to be able to explore what made them great again. I've downloaded a copy of Unreal Tournament 2004 and a bunch of mods for it just to try it out, right? But that's one of the very few games that breaks the mold of this rule, just because, even though there are still online servers for that, the only way you're ever going to get like a full server of people is like through bots and stuff along those lines, right? You're never going to get those experiences with those games that rely on online servers again, and it sucks. With that said, their final question is, would you care for fan server revivals? I do, but unless you get started while the original servers are still up, good fucking luck. I'm assuming this is in relation to like Vita games, but we've already lost the majority of the online servers, whether it be Mod Nation Races Road Trip and Little Big Planet, which were mainly meant for user-generated content, but because we didn't back up the user-generated content, there's no point in bringing those servers back online. And for games like Soul Sacrifice Delta and Freedom Wars, which lost their servers, you still at least have ad hoc play, and there are still ways to play around with like internet connections and what have you, so that you can actually connect to people online with those methods. So there's really no point in the sense of the Vita stuff, because you're not going to need to rewrite the servers entirely like for a PS2. You just need to have a decent ad hoc server emulator and you'll probably be fine for the majority of games. Would like to hear your thoughts on collecting for the Vita going forward and what titles you think would be good to have for a Vita collector. I hate the idea of collecting, although admittedly I'm probably being biased from the sorts of people who have hundreds of games just sitting on a shelf, not being played, perfectly wrapped from when they were delivered in the mail from limited run games or PlayAsia exclusives, and they're just sitting there not being played by actual people who want to play them. And then of course you've got the scalpers who insist on charging hundreds of dollars for incredibly shitty visual novels that one guy might be interested in actually giving a shot just because it looks interesting to him. But then, of course, he's not going to be able to afford it, and so he just puts the thought out of his mind because scalpers are tards. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, I kind of hate the way the game collecting market has gone these days. Then again, I'm the sort of person who just has a bunch of ROMs on a hard drive and is perfectly content with that, so who knows, maybe I might be biased, but the idea of collecting classic video games is just kind of stupid to me these days, unless you're the sort of person who spends 4 hours a night playing random NES games off their shelf. I don't see why you would bother collecting so many. Especially when things like EverDrives and stuff exist. And of course, in the case of the Vita, when, like, it's hacked to shit, so at least you don't need to worry about that, although, as far as I understand it, there's a bunch of games that haven't been dumped from, like, their PlayAsia or limited run games runs. So, yeah, those are something that you can't play through piracy, but yeah, it's still kind of a bitch just having all these games out there that you just can't play because someone's charging too much for them. That's why I hate collecting. But look, if you are the sort of like genuine collector who really enjoys playing on Vita and wants to build as big a collection as possible, you've got my top 100, of course, if you can find copies of all the games there. And then you've got something along the lines of, like, I was just mainly going for, like, the Asian English games. And games that came out really early in the Vita's lifespan, because those are going to be the ones that are hardest to find. Most people are going to be holding on to those ones for dear life, which is a shame that I ended up losing that copy of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. That would have been nice to have. Alright, what else is there? Do you think a Vita 2 could be a reality before 2030? No. Sony are out of the portable market for good. They are gone. They have not said anything otherwise whatsoever in the last 5 years. Every single press release has been, we're not doing anything portable related. We're not doing anything portable related. We might be making a phone, but it's not a gaming phone. Let it go. They're done. They're not doing it again. There is no way. Not a chance. And if they do, I would be incredibly surprised because you don't spend 5 years saying, implying, and otherwise just outright stating we're not making anything more portable, and then go and make something portable. Does your top 100 Vita list still stand to this day? Add Unmetal to the list. Put it in slot number 101, stick it in between anywhere else on the list, and you'll have my top 100. That's basically it. The only worthwhile game that has come out since I put out the revised version of my top 100 list is Unmetal. That's the only game I will put on that list somewhere. Otherwise, it's pretty much all the same. So don't worry too much about that. I'm never going to be updating that video again. I don't see the need to. There's no games coming out that could possibly get in there to my knowledge. And finally, what do you think about the legacy of the Vita and how will it shape portable gaming in the future? It's not going to. It's like the Dreamcast. It's a dying breed of console being replaced by something new. Because the Vita used a lot of proprietary stuff, charging port and memory card. It was just a dedicated handheld console with its own games and maybe a few others in the background that ran off that compatibility layer. Gaming these days is a combination of dockable gameplay with the Switch and the Steam Deck, or it's going to move into PC handhelds, because the Steam Deck, and ironically it's actually like getting its first deliveries out 10 days, or even less than that, after like this video comes out. I reckon the Steam Deck is going to be the next generation of portable gaming. And that's just the long and the short of it, because of the amount of just advantages it has. It's a console, but it's also a PC that you can fill around with in any way you want, install anything you want on it, and just go. Play whatever you like. Emulate PS2 and GameCube games on the go and actually stand a chance of not needing to run tweaks every time you open a specific game. Play thousands upon thousands of PC games that come out incredibly cheaply and tend to stay cheap. Hardware that's actually incredibly capable and can play a ridiculous amount of games. Just the list is endless. And then, of course, you've got the Switch, which has the dockable thing, being able to be played with families really easily, and just being a Nintendo product. So they still have some goodwill left somehow. So you can end up like, what's the word? You can end up having those two competing. And I do think with Steam going towards building out, like, say, the Steam OS and the hardware design to try and get other companies onto this bandwagon, I do think that's going to be the future of portable gaming. You'll have, like, Nintendo doing their own thing, and then you'll have, like, PC portables doing all of this PC stuff. Moore's Law is dead, but that doesn't mean we still can't try and get more and more power into something smaller. And I reckon that's gonna be where we're going. And Vita's quote-unquote innovations, whether it be things like Nier or having dual analog sticks, which was just going to happen anyway, it was just a matter of time, right? Or having a rear touchpad that nobody liked using at the end of the day. Like, any of the innovations that the Vita actually made, no one really truly remembers in the long run. Like, Tearaway got ported to PS4 and lost a lot of what made the Vita special in exchange for what made the DualShock 4 special. There were a couple of other games that were used for that, like Escape Plan, but that's easy to adapt to another control scheme, things like that. What made the Vita special was being an otherwise competent piece of hardware in the face of its gimmicks, and it had a bunch of really good games on it. The only downside being nobody actually talked about the really good games because games journalists can go eat dicks for spreading around the PlayStation Vita has got no games meme. Nintendo retards, just having this idea in their head that because Nintendo did something, Sony must have also done it, therefore I don't want the Sony. Or just all of these other things that cause people to not like the Vita. The Vita lived and died on its games. It didn't live or die on its innovations. And what the Switch and the Steam Deck are providing are actually innovations which are probably going to actually change the state of the portable gaming landscape. I mean, to be fair, the Switch already did because it's been running uncontested for years. So you can't tell me that it basically hasn't taken over the world of handhelds at this point. It's a bit of a sour note to end it on, isn't it? But I really don't have much else to say. Everything else has already been said. We all know why the Vita failed. We also all know why it succeeded. We all know why it was great. We don't need to go over all of that. I just figured I'd add a few more observations in there that I don't hear normally talked about and just give the Vita a sayonara, because there's nothing more to be seen here. Sure, I'll pick it up and replay some games whenever I feel in the mood for it, but yeah, it's just a neat piece of hardware with some good games on it. And a lot of those games have managed to make their way off of the Vita. So, honestly, that's probably the best we could have hoped for. It's like, thank you, Vita, for what you did for my taste in games. Thank you for introducing me to some of my favorite games of all time. And thank you for reminding me how stupid the general gaming populace can be. Makes me realize that I'm not an absolute sheep. But I'm more than happy to say, you had a really good run. Goodbye. At this point. I'm perfectly okay with that. And hopefully you are too. With that said, this has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.